Leftover lasagne.
Leftover lasagna.
Lasagna? No way.
It's a type of sandwich.
Some kind of gross pasta.
Leftover Lasagna is a
podcast
hosted by
my
Nitin
charge
and Tony uncle. Leftover Lasagna.
Very funny name.
Hello and welcome to Leftover Lasagna, the weekly-ish podcast that should really have been called Where is Bill Watterson? But it is not so because I use that name for my sporadically updated Substack. This is still the podcast that wonders if it might be possible to emulate Bill Watterson, who walked away into the wilderness at the peak of his fame. Is there a way to navigate your midlife without losing a sense of humor, while finding a sense of meaning outside of the conventional rat race? I am Tony, a guy who's frequently described as Calvin, a curious and confused boy who frequently pushes at doors that say pull. And joining me is my co host, a veritable Hobbes, a tiger who comes alive in many people's fantasies, the toy you wish you could DIY the stuffing part. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? Say hi.
Hi, Tony. Amazing intro as always. Yes, I am Hobbes, who does not have any jobs. I'm all too ready to walk away at the peak of my fame, except I've not achieved any fame, unfortunately, so far in my life. So I'll be walking away from nothing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
No, but my other junked intro to this is to call you Bill, because if everyone would like to have you in their wallet, and if you don't pay it, it is fine. You're also fine. And to call myself Watterson, because I imbibe liquid in copious amounts, and instead of climbing the corporate ladder, I'm climbing the corporate bladder, which is to say, like, how long can you hold your pee, right? So, yeah, this is what didn't make it to the intro. So, we have quality control. This is
On the topic of bladder, have you noticed that men tend to pee a lot more often than women do?
how the fuck do you know this?
It's very easy to see whether women are going into a toilet or not, whether they visit the washroom or not.
Hold on. You are standing outside both toilets, or you're standing outside the women's toilet? How are you comparing frequencies? Like, I want to know this.
Because I know, and so do you, and this is like very juvenile humor, but I'm sure you have noticed that, the women that you know don't go to the washroom as often as you do.
Oh, wow.
This is true.
Okay.
Haven't you?
Why? No, I don't think so.
I personally feel it's because they've just adapted to better bladder control, because it's much more inconvenient for them.
You know, I am
Much more
clapping
inconvenient for them, yeah.
because Yuval Noah Harari finds yet another mention in this thing.
This has nothing to do
It is
with Harari,
because humans had to stand up to see far, therefore, like, their entire uterus, etc., had to become smaller, which meant
But the men-
in turn the
the
bladder got a bigger size once we stood up, so women don't have to pee as often. Right? This
Human beings stood up to see far. The male of the species stood up just to pee far. This is the reality. I don't know how much of this needs to be junked.
I'm glad that this is not a live stream, right? When we're talking about peeing. So, what is your strategy to make sure that the splashback is minimal?
There are three different contexts in which this strategy can be used, right? The first is what we learned in chemistry lab, where when you're trying to fill a beaker, you always run the liquid down the wall of the beaker, right? You don't pour it right in because you don't want it to splash out. The second context is obviously beer. That's the first thing that came to my mind. But very quickly I remembered, the lessons learned in chemistry class is what really helps me fill my beer. So yeah, it's the same thing. When you're peeing, you pee into the wall of the commode at an angle, at a very, close to vertical angle, so that it just cleanly splashes in.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what is called the B2P network, right? What I'm sharing is the urinal target, where they put a B, right, like close to the base but little above. So there is no splashback, right? Basically.
But since you asked the question, Tony, please go ahead and tell us.
I wanted to bring it back to this behavioral economics thing, which is a nudge, which is that if you put that B thing the other one was a football goal, right, that you put, because men for some reason, like you and me, just go mad over sport and you have to win at any cost. So that's the best way to improve their behavior, right? So
amazing,
that way.
Yeah. And so you know how women, of course, avoid splashback, right? By not going to the washroom, as we've already established.
This is very disturbing. I mean, like, I've built you up into this persona, as our friend Casey will testify. was like a stud and a lady killer and all. But now it turns out you're just like literally like a low budget Dhanush, like stalking women's restrooms creepily and
You
looking
don't
at
need to, by the way. You
volumetric
realize that you don't
analysis.
need to. You don't need to. You realize that, don't you? Simple example, right? So I was in Africa for a while, the last, and we were doing a lot of safaris, right, in Kenya.
Yeah.
So my son and my niece, who are roughly the same age, were part of the same safari jeep, and my son's ability to control his bladder, much like mine, is not that great. But my niece, who's not even that old, right, has already imbibed
Yeah.
that tendency, which I seem to I'm observed in
Dude,
women.
you do realize this is what they call a type 1 error or a type 2 error, one of those, which is that like your son and you obviously share the same genetics. So, like, bladder control might just be genetic as opposed to your niece. You've just done a generalization across genders based on limited data
Of course,
points.
I
I'm
don't
sorry to
have.
say.
Sure. So you're saying this is not true? Maybe we should do some.
No, I'm saying that statistically, I don't think it's true. Right?
You don't think it is true? Wow. No, that
Yeah.
that changes everything.
Okay,
Tony's evidence is that he doesn't think it is true. Wow.
Given
In
the
fact,
num-
okay, this is hilarious.
let's
I just googled.
Let's come up on screen after 2 Googles and wikis says that women need to urinate more frequently than men, right? Thereby
Oh my God.
invalidating. No, once again, this is a win for you, Nitin, because this has invalidated your original premise, but it has also sort of given you a clean sheet as far as standing outside women's loos creepily are concerned. So let's just be clear that you don't do that. This is just based on an observation
No.
of 2 people, one of whom shares your same genes. Therefore, you just like went with the availability bias.
You know what? Maybe there is a scientific angle to this, and I think there is a social angle to this, right? And I think the scientific angle is what we just saw on that screen share. Obviously, the examples that I'm talking about probably are largely Indian examples, and I think it is. And we should probably do more than just first level googling to see if this is true. But I think the cleanliness of toilets and the general hygiene standards in women's toilets, and I think women expect better hygiene in toilets than men do.
No.
Because of the lack of availability and the social, and they don't get the chances as often as men do. I don't know. Maybe we should do more research on this.
The physiological angle is for you to pee into the actual sort of grating, and the social angle is to pee on the bee. So there's a difference between economists and behavioral economists. That's the only thing that I will grant you here. Okay, but moving on to the topic of the day.
This wasn't the topic, sadly. Actually, this is closely related to the topic, but we'll get to that later.
This was the harpic of the day, not the topic of the day. But moving on to the topic for the day. It's basically the moral code of an atheist, right?
The moral code of an atheist is the topic for today.
There are maybe 2 or 3 distinct parts to this. One obviously is the part about atheist, which I think both of us have sort of acknowledged, and we own the label of an atheist, right? So much so that
Absolutely.
it feels like one that cannot change back into something else, right? It can't be like suddenly you're religious, etc. Right? As opposed to the common trope which we see in our parents' generation, especially in our dad's generation, is that they were also I think this is true largely for Tamil and Malu parents, right? That they were also atheists during their 20s, 30s, 40s, but once they hit their 50s, 60s, they went back to theism, right? No, this is not.
Oh, really? I have not really seen that trend.
Okay.
The broad trend I've seen, again, this is again very anecdotal, is only what I've been exposed to, is that most people in my parents' generation tend to be religious to some level.
Oh,
I haven't,
yeah.
I don't think I've seen too many people in my parents' generation who are actually atheists. Yeah.
Possibly because you never spoke to them when they were in their 20s, 30s, and 40s to sort of really get to this thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, probably. I don't know, but
Yeah.
tell us about this phenomenon that you've noticed, this hockey stick shaped atheism.
No, I think there is much to elaborate, right? It is that basically our parents grew up at a time when there weren't too many opportunities per se, and therefore their entire life was centered around one career. Probably, obviously, one career, but also most likely one company, right? And they would have spent their lifetime there. But in their youth, they were obviously blessed with the same zeal that we have and questioned ideas, etc., etc. But over a period of time, they sort of accepted what they would call in Shawshank Redemption as an institutionalization. And probably then, once you've retired, you're sort of going back to say, the only meaning that I can now find in the universe is probably in a divine entity, right? Which broadly makes sense. That trajectory makes sense to me.
Yeah. So, Tony, why don't you actually first tell us? Because you've actually been through a bit of a journey, right? You haven't always been an atheist.
Yeah.
So, tell us about your journey through
Okay.
the ideological spectrum when
Wow.
it comes to
Okay.
theism. Yeah.
I used to be extremely religious, right? Like I used to be the guy. I think I wanted to be a priest when I was young, right? And then instead, the first step was obviously to become an altar boy, which I became. And like at some point, that thing to need to be a priest vanished, not because of any other reason. I think just new opportunities presented themselves, and I moved on from that. But also, like I used to be like crazily what they call charismatic, not in the chemistry sense of the word, but in the sense of the word that it is an extreme form of Christianity where you're like deeply believing in stuff. Right? So much so that in my 10th, when you had the model exams before the board exams, and I didn't have enough time to study history, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pray to God and like read just one page of each chapter, and the question is gonna come from there, right? So from there, obviously, it's been an evolution. Once I've stepped out of home, obviously, once I went to engineering college, didn't go to church as much just because I was lazy. Uh, and post that, obviously, I think, like I mentioned this before, Twitter was probably where my awakening happened in terms of how to ask questions and how to learn as opposed to why you're learning something. And that just led you down to a path where it led to a point where it was scientifically impossible for a creator slash omnipresent, ever benevolent God to exist, right? So once you've I think you also mentioned this, once you start questioning one or two structures, it is easy to question
Uh,
the others also. And yeah, I just got to that place, and then I've never sort of looked back since. Except now, it is an interesting time because my daughter's growing up, and obviously, like we still go to church on Sundays because Rosanna and Emma would like to. But also, all of her questions as an 8-year-old are around, why don't you believe in God, right? So she wants to understand from me like how it is possible that someone can't, right? So it is an interesting time in that sense, which leads me to asking a few more questions around my own atheism. So there are two or three parts to this. One, like we've mentioned before, there is no moral superiority to being an atheist as opposed to believing in
yeah.
God, right? I think actually objectively there is a huge benefit if you are able to believe in a god, right? So one of my own favorite tweets was that my late 20s I used to mock people who believed in god. Now in my late 30s I'm jealous of people who believe in a god because at least they have a reason for why things are happening, right?
Yeah.
And as an atheist you have to find the reason why something is happening and justify it to yourself, and also therapy is extremely expensive, right? So
Yeah.
I think there is actually, if you are able to believe in an entity like a god, then it is actually beneficial in this.
Yeah, that's very nicely put, right? If you, I go back to the example, which is why I said what we spoke about earlier is in a way linked to what this topic is. I know it's a frivolous analogy, but there's a reason why that picture of the bee is put inside the pot, right? It's to make sure that you have something to aim for and focus your attention. Yeah,
Oh
and
wow!
yeah,
My
and
God!
yeah,
Hey,
if
dude, what's it? Let's put that on echo, or you just repeat it because like that is massively profound. My God. Okay, fine.
yeah, that's what it is, right? So splashback is a problem, and in order to avoid that splashback, it helps sometimes inside the pot if you can have the picture of a fly or a bee or whatever, so that people can aim and focus their energies towards hitting it, so that there is no splashback. Not everybody needs this crutch to help them aim and focus and ensure that they urinate without having splashback. While the analogy is a little trite, and maybe even people might even take this the wrong way, I'm not equating religion to something that you put inside a pot for sure, but the analogy still holds. I think there are people who are able to find purpose and meaning in their lives without having to believe in God. There are other people who find purpose and meaning in their life by believing in something which they hold very dear to themselves. And that might be their work. That might, for lots of people, it tends to be their work. For some people, it tends to be their relationships, their family, and which they broadly then define as their karma or whatever. And then there are other people who have all of that, but still like to have that crutch, right? Which is this higher power, this higher entity. The moment you say that there is a higher entity that cannot be explained, it becomes very easy to create that purpose around it, right? Because you don't have to explain it and justify it to anybody
Yeah.
because it cannot be explained or justified. So, in that sense, religion is the easiest, most omnipotent, omnipresent crutch that can be available to ensure that you're able to lead your life with focus and without
Correct.
having the splashback and without straying in your life, right? So, religion is that crutch. It's a ever available crutch for you to take and run with. And if it helps you lead a better life, lead a kinder life, be nicer to people around you, then I'm all for it, right? There's
Yeah.
no argument against it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so in the phrasing of the episode title, which is broadly the moral code of an atheist, I think there are four questions that we are posing, right? Which we'll probably cover across this episode in varying degrees of time and effort consumed. One is that, is there a superiority of, let's say, atheism over religion? Second is probably moving away from religion to one's own spirituality is one better than the other. The third being, if you're saying we are atheists, where does the morality come from, right? Does it come from
Yeah.
God or a causal link or something else? And four, because primarily we are not academics, we are more practitioners who just like to shoot their mouth off. What is our own sort of moral code now that we've established that we are atheists, right? So I think the first point is the one that you covered, right? So let's talk about just religion versus atheism, right? I don't think there is a fundamental difference between one or the other because they are too broad to classify, right? So if
Yeah.
one of the arguments could be that religion is the reason for a lot of conflict in the world, you could make the same argument about atheism also, right? Which is like, for instance, communist countries like China and Russia have probably killed more people than some of the other religious countries, if you look at it statistically. So I don't think there is a moral judgment to say religion is a worse driver of hate than any other ism, right? So it's just that
Yeah.
people in large groups like to hate other people and will always find a reason to eliminate them. What do you say?
Interesting take. My only counter to that is while most other isms might be founded upon something that is real, religion is the one ism, and religion is not really an ism. It actually doesn't end with ISM, right? But theism is the one ism that is actually entirely founded upon stories, right? And I'm not bringing Harari into this, but I just say
Yeah, I was
uh,
about to.
every religion is based upon something that cannot be proven, which happened, several centuries back, and there
Yeah,
is no evidence. And of course, anything that has to do with a higher power, anyway, is something that can't be explained. I
yeah,
find it, and your point is probably right. Like people will find reasons to divide and conquer, or divide and fight. Um, the fact that the other isms also contribute to a lot of pain and conflict cannot be used to give religion a free pass in my mind.
okay.
Yeah, while I hear you that
No, so what is your analogy? It is that religion is probably something like homeopathy.
explain in the sense.
It really doesn't work scientifically, but people believe in it
Ah,
and still continue to do it, and will sort of push back against scientific constructs in some senses, like scientific medicine in that respect.
which is see, that's the thing, right? Like religion is not particularly against anything. If you think about it, you could, like, some of the greatest scientists in the world, right, were actually deeply religious people. It's
Yeah,
not like these people did not know that the stories that they read in the scriptures, whatever they may be, were not quite consistent with the science that they had experienced and mastered, right?
correct.
Yeah, go
Distinction
on.
that we are making is religion is people of a particular, let us say, divine belief coming together as a community, right? As opposed to your own personal belief of a god, right? I think both are different.
Explain further. I don't know if they're
So,
different because I think that they're two parts of the same evolution, right? Because religion begins as a personal experience. Yes,
right,
and we do tend to congregate in groups that we identify with. So it's inevitable that, if I have a personal experience and a personal belief that a bunch of other people resonate with, then I will self identify with them, right? So I don't
correct.
know if they're two sides of the, I don't know if they're two different
And
things, really.
and lead to echo chambers, and lead to other people as different, and lead to hate in that sense, and lead to
Yes.
discrimination, and lead to
Yeah.
finally whatever, like violence. I suppose like individual beliefs, for instance, like Einstein probably was a believer, right? In that sense.
Yeah.
uh, and that necessarily didn't sort of contribute to, let us say, community sort of expression of that particular religion.
It's the same thing, right? So everyone's on a spectrum. I'm sure, I don't know, I'm just guessing. Albert
Okay,
Einstein probably went to a synagogue or a place of worship which was frequented
right.
by other people of the same persuasion. Now, I'm sure there were people of the lunatic fringe who used to frequent that same community, whom he also probably self identified with. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
that he was going to be a part of all the weird, strange, religiously fanatic stuff that everyone in that group was going to do, right? We all choose to, everyone has their own line that they draw at some point or the other. My point is, see, like every other ism, right? Like everything now, if you let's actually draw an analogy somewhere, right? So Bangalore is known for its product managers, right? Now every product manager believes that they are very unique in the way they think about products, etc. But there is now also this cult of product managers who tend to hang out together in PM groups or PM workshops where they catch up and exchange notes. And there are a bunch of these different types of hackathons and things that happen all the time. Now that's a different abstraction of the fanaticism around a certain shared belief and ideal, right?
Right.
Not everyone who attends those sessions is a fanatical believer in the superiority or the the omnipresence or the omnipotence of product management, but all of
Hmm.
them do identify as product managers at the end of the day, right? The
Hmm.
fact that Albert Einstein was not a religious zealot, right, is fine. I don't think it has anything to do with the fact that he was also a great scientist. It just happens to be that
Right.
he was not a religious zealot. That's all I'm trying to
Yeah.
say. I don't have names here, but extremely popular cardiac surgeons, for instance, who are very deeply religious and will
Yeah.
pray before they perform
So
their surgeries. That
let's take a different
coexists.
example, right? Let's take a different example. It's probably in terms of how religions treat women versus believers who are women, right? So every religion,
Yeah.
without exception, treats women as second class citizens based on their texts, right? Whether it reflects as how property is carried forward, how surnames are
Yeah.
carried forward, or what you need to do to get a good husband, or fast for your husband, or whatever that is, or just in terms of how easy divorce is for a man versus a woman in certain religions, etc. Every religion treats women badly, right? Therefore,
Yeah.
in my estimation, religion is um, in that sense essential within air quotes for communities to abide by a certain common set of rules, right? That is why they originally formed, as opposed to
Yeah.
your belief in a god of a particular religion does not necessarily make you adhere to those rules, right? Which means that if you were born a Catholic woman, you'd probably still, do all the rituals that are required for you to, sort of in some senses be a subsidiary second class citizen in that sense, in that religion, as women tend to be. This is, I think, highly reflected in any sort of festival that we have, right? While men or boys can wake up at whatever time they want to, the women are either slaving away in the kitchen through the night, or they wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. to prepare the snacks that we munch on, right? And put photos on Instagram about. So, in that sense, a lot of religion also has a sense of patriarchy and communal order associated with it, right? That women are men's property, etc., etc. Whereas, if that same woman were to believe in a god, I don't think many of those things will apply in her sort of personal scheme of things.
No, see, I disagree because,
Why?
see, it is inevitable that religion is patriarchal because every structure around us is patriarchal. And that is because every structure around us is predominantly shaped by men, because men have always had that power and they've only worked towards increasing that power with time. So a woman born into a certain religion is born into patriarchy, unfortunately, right? And the autonomy to question the patriarchy in the religion is also not necessarily present in most women, right? And hence there'll be very few of them who will very early question what the unfairness of it all. And because that's they're just again conditioned and shaped by the world into which they're born, right? So that's inevitable. And
No,
as a
so
flip side to this, right? The flip side to this, and this was actually a point I heard in our favorite, at least my favorite podcast now, Everything is Everything, where Ajesha mentions this, how countries and economies go through progress, right? And one of the inevitable and important stages in progress is when a country actually starts to become less religious. And this has been true for every European nation. It is currently true for America. America is far less religious than it used to be, let's say 30 years back. Europe went through this evolution as well. And there are other parts of the world where this will eventually and slowly happen. Because the fact that you're renouncing religion, which, like I said, is a construct that is built on a lot of imagination, but also a construct that is deeply patriarchal, deeply traditional in the way it looks at things, is anti-science, etc., is a very important step towards that economy or that society becoming more modern in the way it thinks and looks at things, including things like equality towards women, right?
yeah.
And I think it goes without saying, while the world is still deeply unequal, you will notice that the less religious countries tend to be less unequal for women. And I think that is
No,
actually an offshoot of exactly this. Yeah.
that's not true, right? For instance, I think so. I mean, this is an interesting point because one of the most important points of vote for women in the US this year is actually abortion, right? Where they've actually
Yeah.
gone multiple steps back, despite not being a very religious country in that sense, right? You won't think of US, at least broadly, as an extremely religious country, right?
So yeah, he actually makes this distinction. US
Yeah.
was the outlier to this theory for many years, and people were wondering how is the US not actually becoming less religious. And you're
Yeah.
right, abortion is a huge. I mean, let's not go into the political setup in America and what they're going through right now. That, of course, is probably a topic for another day. But this is broadly true. America is less religious than it used to be, in spite of what what the conversation
Yeah, no,
around
so
abortion and the
exactly. So
current. Yeah.
even if you were politically Republican, as long as you're a woman, abortion becomes that one thing where you will
Yeah.
vote against Republicans, right? Which means
Yeah.
that the same analogy being that while religion says that society should be patriarchal, in their own spaces, women don't necessarily have to embrace it, right? Which is Republican women also will vote Democrat or against, even though like at a community slash house level, they'll still say that they're Republican in that sense. So there is a distinction between religion, which is about a community, versus, in that sense, your equation with a divine being, which is your own.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about this, right? I don't know for how many people, how many theists or how many people who believe in God actually go in with that belief that is extremely personal and keep it
Hmm.
to, and don't actually make it a community thing
Right.
out there, right? So,
So no, I think broadly that I don't think there's a difference between religion versus atheism as a uniter of multiple people to enable something like a hate. In the absence of religion, they'll find something else. But at a personal
yeah.
level, my assertion is that actually having a belief in a god is actually an advantage. Do you agree on
Yeah.
that?
Having belief in something that can help you move your life is definitely an advantage, right? There is
Yeah,
no questioning that, which is why
yeah.
I'm saying it, because we want to
So
pee
I
without
think,
the backsplash
yeah,
at the end of the
the
day.
two simple philosophical thought experiments that become relevant from what you mentioned was, one is of course Russell's teapot, right, where it was postulated by Bertrand Russell, where he said if you basically suggest that there is a large teapot which is orbiting the earth at a distance of x, which cannot be spotted by the naked human eye, and then you are saying that it continues to revolve around the earth, and I say no, it does not. He says that the burden of proof is on the person who claims that there is a teapot revolving
Yeah.
around the earth at x distance, right? If someone claims there is a god, like, the burden of proof should rest on them, right?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
as opposed to there is this other thing by the other mathematician Pascal, who basically talks about the Pascal's wager, which is to say that there are two possibilities, right? One is that a nice 2 by 2 matrix actually, that you believe in God and God doesn't exist,
Yeah,
or you believe in God and God exists, right? Or you don't believe in God and God doesn't exist, and you don't believe in God and God exists, right?
yeah,
In the case where you believe in God and God doesn't exist, there is nothing that you lose, right? You're just, what, worm
yeah.
meat pushing up daisies. But in the case that you don't believe in God and there actually exists a God, then you're fucked, right? So that is Pascal's wager. In that sense, the expected value of belief is much higher, actually.
Yeah. No, but what is Pascal's point? Why is it bad if you don't believe in God and God actually exists? If you continue to lead your
So
life
you,
in a
yes.
in a
So let
good
us
way.
say, no. So let us say in a theistic way, you
Yeah.
have a vengeful God who basically says, okay, you've come here, and now
Yeah.
you can either go to heaven, hell, or purgatory. Then you are
Yeah.
probably not automatically getting into heaven by disbelieving him, because he's the supreme being,
God.
right? As per
Yeah.
the first commandment, in that
Fair.
sense,
I get that. Yeah. I mean,
actually.
no, see, this point is fine. I mean, the whole concept of a benevolent God versus a punitive God is where this
Hmm.
goes into, right? Like, God itself is an imaginary construct. Now we are going into ascribing characteristics to that imaginary construct, and there are of course multiple religions, and different religions look at God in different ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really depends on. Obviously, Pascal is coming from a point of view where God is punitive and vengeful, and thou shall bow down to me and pay your respects, and if not, you shall be sent to hell. If that is
Correct.
the purpose or the be all and end all of a God,
Hmm.
then yeah, what's the point? I mean, we have
Yeah.
better 56-inch gods in our country that
No,
that
but the
yeah,
other,
that rule by the same metric. So yeah,
yeah.
which are real,
No, the
I
other
would say.
point that you made was that what is the problem as long as they live a
Yes,
good life, right? So
exactly.
the
Which comes from the
fundamental
word. Yeah, yeah,
from the
exactly.
fundamental assertion of someone who believes is that, let us say you're basically suggesting that there is no causal link between what you do and what you get as an outcome, right?
Hmm.
Because there is no God who is keeping tab, etc., etc. You're saying the world is fairly random. What you do does not in any way affect a future. Like there is no thing like karma or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
the balance sheet never tallies. So in a world where that exists, why wouldn't the entire world come to a collapse? Because everyone will just should act extremely selfishly.
Well, the best example to counter your point is Donald Trump, right? Now, if you ever wanted proof that God does not exist, right, and there is
Yeah,
no concept of karma in this world, then it would be someone like Donald Trump becoming the president of or becoming the most powerful person in the world twice, not once. Right? You can understand a singularity where there is a certain series of
correct,
events that ends up in Donald Trump becoming president once. But if it is
correct.
actually happening twice, right,
Yeah.
and we can all agree that that gentleman has not done anything good in his life, right? Let's just say he's had everything handed to him on a platter. There doesn't have a
he's
single redeeming
he's
feature.
he's not even peed on a bee. He's
He's
basically
not
going
even peed on
directly
a
for
bee.
the
Yeah, he's the kind of guy who will pee everywhere around that bee, right? Because I'll show you, I can splash everywhere, and I can fuck up everything. That's what that person is, right? So the only way you can justify Donald Trump going from strength to strength and
right.
success to success in his life is if you say that he in his previous birth he was some XYZ, and now he's reaping the rewards for having been a very very good soul in his
Correct.
previous birth. Now, yeah, sure, you can always come up with
No,
one
but
derivative level of
therefore,
abstraction higher, but yeah, that's your example. So yeah.
no,
The world
therefore,
is
the
on the brink
question
of
is,
collapse. Yeah.
so Nitin, with your brilliant argument, you have convinced a person who was previously a believer to become an atheist. Okay, now their question is, now let us say everyone listens to Leftover Lasagna and everyone in the world is now convinced that there is no God. How do we,
Yeah.
as a society, not go down into utter chaos and anarchy because there is no causal link between what you do and what you get?
But that's the thing, right? And this is why these are all forces that are not necessarily opposing but acting in multiple orthogonal directions, right? So, see, the broad point is this, right? While you are also on one end learning that God does not exist, and this is all a theoretical concept that you may not need if you have your own rationalism and your own ability to think through things, you're also getting exposed to science. You're also getting exposed to great art and great literature and just great ways of thinking around you all the time.
Yeah.
If you're being subject to all these forces at the same time, it's not that the lack of religion does not make you necessarily a brute. Because that's what you're saying. You're saying that not having religion is going to lead the world into anarchy. I'm saying it absolutely does not have to, because there are so many other forces that are acting upon every single person out there, and
Correct.
in ways that were never possible in the past, thanks to where technology has reached now, right? We all have access to the greatest thinking and the greatest ideas, and which by the way also makes religion a little more moot than it ever was, because
Yeah.
there was a time when our circles were the Dunbar number of 100 people that we know, right? And our combined knowledge was only whatever those 100 people were able to tell us, because we were not even exposed to anything else outside of that. So then it was almost inevitable that you would pick up the concepts of, say, religion or whatever it is. The lived experience of those 100 people became your lived experience. Slowly we started getting the Gutenberg press. We started having access to libraries where we could go and converse with people that lived in different parts of the world at different points in time and get ideas from them, which opened up our mind a little more. If you join the dots from there to where we are now, where we all have computers in our pockets, which give us access to anything happening anywhere in the world at any point in time immediately. The
Yeah.
only thing we don't get access to is the future, right? And I think it's a matter of time before we figure that out as well. It is
Yeah.
inevitable that the Dunbar number is not 100 anymore, right? We are connected to every other person in the universe by 6 levels or whatever. There are so many ideas that we are exposed to all the time, and it becomes easier to move away from the concept of religion as you get more and more exposed to ideas from more people, is broadly that. Because
Yeah.
religion, to start with, was a crutch towards explaining things that could not be explained, right, in the
Yeah.
world.
Maybe
And
not a crutch, maybe a step ladder, maybe something that
maybe a
helps
step,
you.
whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
Because
It
there
can
was
be a
too
positive
much.
adjective.
Yeah, and in fact, if you go all the way back, right, all religions were rooted in paganism, because back then we couldn't explain fire, we couldn't explain rain, we couldn't explain lightning, and
Yeah.
as a species, we have traversed a huge expanse of ability, or we've gone through such a big journey now that we are able to
Yeah.
explain a lot of these things from first principles.
Yeah.
So the relevance of religion towards making the world more explainable is definitely reducing, right?
Yeah.
And which is why the only reason why people still continue to I believe people still continue to use religion is to try and give purpose and anchor their lives in a certain way, because
Yeah.
you also need that, you need the ability to anchor and ground yourself also as you get
Yeah.
exposed to more and more stuff, right? So it's the flip side
Yeah.
of what the initial purpose of religion might have been. So yeah,
Yeah.
my only thing is, the absence of religion does not lead the world into chaos necessarily.
Brilliant.
In fact, I think it's the
Brilliant.
exact opposite. Yeah.
No, so we'll head into part 3 of this podcast. But just to sum up what we've broadly said so far, right? One is that religion exists at a community level, right? And there are certain books that you abide by, which is why you will never have a woman becoming the Pope of the Catholic Church, right?
Absolutely.
However, you can still be a woman who is Catholic and still believe in the God, the Holy Trinity, Jesus Christ, etc., etc., and still not agree to something the Bible says, like, women should always submit to men, for instance, right? These are not conflicting positions. Now, which comes to the third part, therefore, if we are sort of looking at individual people, it is their own belief system versus another, right? And therefore, the question that we were trying to answer just now is that does morality, when we're saying moral code of an atheist, does morality come from God, right? That is the important question that we need to answer, which Nitin, you said no to. But the funny thing is, all of this has already been answered by the Greeks centuries ago, right? It is just a mistake of history that Christianity gained popularity in between and actually led us astray in terms of thinking philosophically versus following something blindly. So, have you heard of this dude called Euthyphro?
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
Could you
this
spell
is
his
at
name for
least this at least wasn't there in Everything is Everything. Nonsense.
us? Euthyphro. Could you spell that name for
Euthyphro.
me, please?
Euthyphro. Euthyphro.
Euthyphro. Okay.
As opposed to frothy you, which is what happens if you pee directly into the water closet. Anyway, so Euthyphro was a dude who existed at the same time as Socrates, right? So this is in one of those things that Plato keeps writing about Socrates. So Euthyphro is there at the court basically to prosecute his father, who has committed a grave crime, and at the same time Socrates is there facing a charge, right, against himself. So Euthyphro is like the woke dude of the time who is basically ready to prosecute his dad for having committed a crime, and therefore claims to be the knower of all that is virtuous and moral goodness, etc., etc. Right. So then Socrates basically asks him, so what is virtue? What is moral good? What is piety? Right. So then he basically gives some examples. So Socrates, being the anal prick that he is, says, don't give me examples of virtue. What is virtue? What defines virtue? Right? And so Euthyphro basically says anything that the gods like is virtue, and anything that the gods don't like is not virtue. Right? And virtue comes from God, basically. So Socrates is like, bro, like the times that we are living in, it is a pantheistic religion, and the Greek pantheon has a bunch of naughty, nice, and weird gods. So, what gods are you considering here for virtue? Right. So then Euthyphro is basically saying that anything that all gods love is virtue. Anything that all gods dislike is the opposite, impiety, and anything in middle is probably a gray area that you need to sort of comprehend with, right? So then Socrates is like, okay, but tell me this. Is it moral because the gods have said it is moral? Is it virtue because the gods have said it is virtue? Or do the gods like it because it is virtuous and moral in the first place? Right. So what is the causal chain here? Right. And that is something that Euthyphro has to explain. Right. Which is an interesting proposition, right? So is it more? So he's saying that what is moral / virtuous is what the gods like, and then Socrates leads him down the further part to say, is it moral because the gods like it, or do the gods like it because it is inherently moral? Right? It is like saying the grass is green, and I've written it down that the grass is green, and then you're looking at grass and saying it is green. Is the grass green because it is written in the book, or is it written in the book because the grass is green? Right? So that is the one that he needs to answer, and obviously he fumbles. It doesn't really get answered, but obviously, what is the answer here, right? Is it moral because the gods love it, or do the gods in that construct love it because it is moral anyway?
I think Euthyphro and Socrates, right, basically hosted Leftover Lasagna many millennia before we existed. That's what this proves. What else do you say? I mean, this is such an academic discussion that like, what's even the point? It's mental masturbation at the end of the day.
No, it's not, right? So the point that Socrates was trying to make was that it doesn't come from gods, right? Morality exists because people exist. It is exactly the point that you are making. You are the modern day Socrates, and you don't even recognize.
This is the problem. That's why I need my Euthyphro, man, which is you. No, I take back what I said. Yeah, this is a great point, right? So morality fundamentally stems, as does religion, and as does the concept of God. All of this stems potentially from our own minds, right? So we have, I mean, what is religion at the end of the day? It is what human beings have codified as the right way to live.
Right.
So if it is in the scriptures, it is there because a human being put it there, and while claiming that a god put it there. So yeah, absolutely. I like this idea. Which is why, and in fact, this is the strongest argument against religion, right? Because
exactly.
Yeah, amazing. Love it. Now I get it. Yeah, good. We are at a yes.
Thank you. Thanks to Socrates and Plato. But therefore,
the problem, right, to jump one step ahead, right? The problem then is, if everybody says that, okay, morality is something that stems from my own mind, because as a emancipated human being, I have the ability to come up with that code. What if you have conflicting morals? What if my moral differs from yours? Or let's say from Silambarasans, because Simbu has said that plants are also living things, but I don't believe so. I believe it's completely moral to consume plants. Actually, I think it is immoral to consume plants. You should be consuming animals. But so then, how do you do whose morality? Locust. Yeah, who decides whose morality is the right morality? Right. So that's where we are. Yeah.
No, 1 second. So you are basically conflating two different issues. One is that we are saying, therefore, morality, although it stems from the word mores, which has to be like customs, accepted by a culture or whatever, no customs duty. We are essentially saying that each person's individual morality can be different, right? And that has no causal effect on the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
And also, universal morals might be something, but the construct such as religion doesn't run the world anymore, right? The world is clearly
Yeah.
run by capitalism. So if anything, you should look at capitalism's morals versus your morals, and how they align, and does that help you or harm you in that sense, right? So the idea there being, while we speak of something like climate change and eating plants and all of that, realistically, it is that corporations have to step up and solve it, right, and move away from their selfishness. And the most popular thing was introduced in 2004 was this construct called personal carbon footprint, right? And it was realistically a PR campaign by British Petroleum to move the blame of climate change away from corporations to people, right? So
Yeah.
your individual morality is in no small measure affected
Yeah.
by the capitalistic culture that we are a part of, right? It's not religion anymore in that sense.
Yeah, for every 6 hit in the power play, somebody was planting 100 trees or something, right? Like, what's stopping you from planting all the trees that you can,
For every
right?
dot
Of
ball,
course.
yeah,
For
yeah.
every
No,
dot
but
ball, correct. Huh.
which,
It is
which
a
brings
branding
us to
exercise.
the
Yeah.
yeah, so which brings us to a different point which you made, which is that, so what if my morality differs from yours, right? And what is
Yeah.
your sort of take on that?
I think as two educated and aware human beings, we should then discuss and find out why there is a conflict between our morals, and at least try and understand where the other person is coming from better.
Right.
Because the only way to resolve it is through dialogue, right?
Essentially, by virtue of saying that there is no God, there is no religion, you're also saying potentially that there is no causal link, there is no karma. Once you sort of move from theism to atheism, which happened with me, and then you're battling it out to say, so therefore, what is the meaning of life, right? Why should I be morally good, etc., etc., etc.? And
Yeah.
therefore, the answer becomes that the only thing that really matters is that you find peace within yourself. Right? Nobody else matters, which is to say that as long as you're clear with your conscience, none of the rest of the shit matters, right? Therefore only your moral code matters. Therefore it is not actually depressing that there is no greater purpose to life, as divine
Yeah.
beings or whatever that you think. It is actually liberating to say, look, do whatever you're comfortable with as long as your moral code agrees with it, right? And that's largely it. And therefore if you live in a society, as long as it is not violating certain laws or principles that society still hold outside of religion, then you will have a peaceful society, right? As long as you sort of only consider your morality. So if the case is that I become vegan and you still eat animals, we'll still be able to sit down at the table together and have a happy meal with you eating a juicy steak and me eating, I don't know, asparagus, mushroom, or like plant based meat, one of these things. And still, jackfruit. Apparently, jackfruit is the next thing in terms of meaty texture. No, but the point being, therefore, it doesn't matter, right? Like, I can't guilt you into changing your thing, or it doesn't matter to you because, like, I believe what I believe, right? And as long
Yeah,
as
it's
it
fine.
adheres to your moral code, we are okay, right?
Yeah, which is fine, right? There is this whole thing where people generally the retirement age is 60, right? Typically everywhere it's around 60. There is some science and research to show that lots of people actually get into mental health issues soon after their retirement, right?
Yep.
Well, whereas what you would expect is the exact opposite. You would expect people to actually be looking forward to their retirement and to enjoying life without having to be saddled with responsibilities and work. But what happens is the exact opposite. And you also have, of course, this is a bit anecdotal. There are many examples of people actually saving up money to spend and enjoy themselves during their retirement, who
Yeah.
end up dying soon after their
Correct.
retirement, right? For
Yeah. No,
whatever
but this.
unforeseen health issue which comes about. Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're saying.
No, this is scientific and psychological backing, right? Like,
Yeah,
essentially, there is a very small book written by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for
correct.
Meaning. And
Yeah,
the second part of it is logotherapy, which means like how do you find meaning in your life, right? And
yeah,
basically, and this is a guy who went through the concentration camp and came out Thankfully, although his entire manuscript was lost and he had to rewrite the 2 books and all that. So the essence of logotherapy basically says that meaning in life actually comes from 3 sources. One is work, the daily work that
Yeah.
you do, which
Yeah.
is what these people lose after they retire, right? And you don't realize how much of meaning you derive from work, right? Second is
Exactly.
someone to love, which is family or like, whatever it is. And third is going through hardships, right? So even
Yes.
if you're in the
With
most
dignity.
stressful job, you're essentially sort of finding meaning in solving those problems, right? Or going
Correct.
through those situations and like doing it. Suddenly you're made devoid of these 2 sources of meaning. One is work and one
Yeah.
is probably going through hardships if you've saved up enough, right? And once you've cut off 2 sources of meaning, obviously then it makes sense why this happens.
Which is the interesting thing, right? Now, if you're saying that the new religion is actually capitalism, and I fully buy that, the logic with which you said that. And if people have actually bowed down at the altar of capitalism and they're going and doing their work and they're finding purpose from the work they do and from the hardships they face at work, it's actually not surprising that you see people run into health issues and psychological issues soon after their retirement, because
Absolutely.
without knowing it they're actually stepping out of the temple, right? They're actually renouncing their religion, or at
Absolutely.
least their connection to that religion suddenly in life, right? So
You can't tell at this point in time, is this the truth or is it what capitalism is sold us? Because famously, the US does not have health insurance and does not have a retirement age, right? Or like
yeah,
any concept of any of this pension business, which means practically, if you're living somewhere like in New York or whatever, you'll probably need to work till the day you die.
yeah.
Right? So, is this a capitalist scam or is it actual sort of healthy way of living? Is a different question. However,
Yeah.
taking it back to Bill Watterson, where we said that work doesn't necessarily mean work, right? You can still find the meaning in doing things, basically creating, right? For instance,
Yeah.
the reason we do Leftover Lasagna is that in the act of coming together in a structured format, obviously we get to speak to each other more than we otherwise would, which is always enjoyable, but also you're putting it out in the world, right? There is a huge effort in terms of editing that goes on behind the scenes, which is probably like 3 to 4x of the time that we spend recording or even thinking about the content that we speak on the episode, right?
Yeah.
But between you and me, we generally enjoy that process of editing also, right?
Yeah.
Although it is not
Yeah.
apparent to anyone what we do to get it done. If you want, we can send you a 15-step WhatsApp forward of the process it takes to edit on Riverside plus Clipchamp and upload on YouTube and Spotify, right? But it's essentially that, right? That work doesn't necessarily mean what gives you monetary value. It means the act of creation and going through something hard is good enough. So if you find a hobby that you can sort of pursue, then that's good enough to give you that meaning.
Exactly. And religion is nothing different from any of that, right? You could change work. Everywhere you use the word work in your previous sentence can be replaced by religion and it holds good.
Correct. Oh,
And
so
that's
this
what
is
it is.
why when people retire, they get religious.
Maybe, which is what I was thinking of, right?
Yeah.
When you made that point, which is what I was thinking of, right? So this neatly ties in the loop, right? That's what it is, right? Ultimately, you want the anchoring and the mooring. Something
Yeah.
provides it to you. If your life situation means that you're going away from something that has
Yeah.
anchored your life for 25, 30 years, then you find something else, or you rediscover
Yeah.
something else that you let go of 40
Yeah.
years back. Ultimately, as Harari has said, we are very good at telling stories to ourselves, right? That's what it is.
Oh man. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Everything else is an
Why
offshoot.
an itch? Why an
Feeling
itch?
superior about your own work or about your own religion.
Yeah, of course.
Fighting with people of other religions. Those are all offshoots, right? And you can't really
Yeah.
blame religion for any of that. It's ultimately
Of
the
course.
only people to be blamed is ourselves and
No,
our
see, here's the thing,
complicated
right?
minds.
I think the point about Bill Watterson and maybe about Jim Carrey also is that whatever achievement you think people, especially in the Olympic season, right? Whatever achievement that you think people have made is not worth the same to them as it is to you, right? And there is this very nice quote by Jim Carrey, who also has a very interesting. Have you seen comedians in cars getting coffee? Unfortunately, Seinfeld is cancelled now, but the episode with Jim Carrey is really fun, right? So
Ah,
instead of Bill Watterson, it could have easily been Jim Carrey, right? And he basically is like painting away in a basement and he's very, very peaceful with it. But the quote that I wanted to share of Jim Carrey was this, right? That I hope everybody could get rich and famous and will have everything they ever dreamed of, so they will know that it is not the answer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Uh,
wonderful. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like you should read it once more in your voice so it becomes more impactful. Go for it.
Whiskey honey. I hope everybody could get rich and famous and will have everything they ever dreamed of, so they will know that it is not the answer. Quote Jim Carrey.
Beautiful. Say
Good
say
movies.
say stop quote, or else like now everything you say from here on will be
Will get
attributed to Jim
attributed wrongly to Jim Carrey.
Carrey.
Okay.
Right, so while that part remains, Nitin, so to sort of you started me off on the journey of my movement from theism to atheism, and while we are about first principles, I feel like there is a genuine advantage if you can short circuit the first principles funda by leaning on something that's already been created. Right? So therefore, my current moral code actually has mooring in kind of something that is pretty ancient and Greek as well. Do you have something similar, or is it just like make it up as you go along? Calvin Ball is your moral code.
No, it's absolutely Calvin Ball. You said you found mooring in something that's ancient in Greek. The only thing I
Yeah.
could think of was Greek yogurt, which I find a lot of mooring in these days. By the way, Greek yogurt is amazing, lot more protein than the regular curd that you have in India. So
Helps gut
if anybody
health, epigamia.
helps gut health, epigamia, yeah,
Yeah,
it's epic.
this reminds me of the other T-shirt quote that I saw in college, which was that you shouldn't disrespect bacteria. It is the only culture some people have.
Some people have, yeah,
So this is this philosophy which has been
yeah.
like actually badly abused by tech bros, which is called Stoicism, right? And actually, I came across it on a simplified episode which Naren had done way back in 2019. Naren is Naren Shenoy, obviously, who will probably soon write a book, hopefully. Our benevolent, extremely intelligent friend, who does a bunch of stuff which is hasn't seen as much popularity as it should, but hopefully it will. So he introduced us on a simplified short to this
Yeah.
funda called Stoicism, right? And I just took to it like a duck to water. And the essence of why this becomes relevant, like I said, is that maybe at times you don't have to work out everything from first principles, right? So maybe if you have a framework, then you can just build on top of it rather than doing everything yourself in that sense. So, essence of Stoicism is the four broad principles of virtue, right, or the moral code, which is wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, right. And the thing is that when people think of the word Stoic, you probably think of someone who is without any emotion, right, which is not the case at all, right. And
Yeah.
Stoicism is basically like a practical something that you have to live out every day as opposed to something else, right. I'm not sort of selling Stoicism. I'm not a member of the Stoic Society of Pennsylvania or some shit. But it's something that works very well, which is to say that how do you sort of deal with everyday situations, right? And basically, when we said that there is no causal link to everything, then it means that anything that happens around you is probably more things that you're not in control of than you're in control of, right?
Yeah.
So religion tries to tell you that if you do this enough, if you pray enough, then your life will change like this, like that, other than the effort that you're putting in, right? So Stoicism divorces you from that idea that you have to sort of do a certain thing which is unrelated to the task at hand to
Yeah.
get a certain stage, right? Here, therefore, in addition to these
Yeah.
four principles, what Stoicism basically says is live in agreement with nature. Right? And nature does not mean like trees that are planted when there is an IPL dot ball. It means the nature of things. Right? So the Latin phrase for
Yeah.
this is something called amor fati, AMORFATI, right? Which, according to Naren, is
Okay.
also what a Bengali says when he's scared, right? Amor fati. But in Latin, it basically means love everything that happens, right? Like love everything that happens to you. So if whether you get
Ah.
promoted or you get fired or you fall ill or you
Or you get
are
cancer.
able to
Yeah.
run 10 kilometers in 45 minutes. Love everything that happens to you, because broadly there are more factors that you're not in control of than you are in control of, right? And that is a very sort of interesting philosophy, right? The other aspect is something called memento mori, which says remember one day you will die, right? And like one of the underappreciated quotes from Mahatma Gandhi, which actually I heard on the Seen and the Unseen and then passed on to Emma. And then she remembered it so much that 3 weeks later, when she played Minecraft, she wrote on one of the walls, is live like you'll die tomorrow, learn like you'll live forever, right? Which is brilliant, right?
Interesting.
So memento mori is not to say that you will die one day. It is to say that whatever little time you have available, what the fuck are you doing with it, right? Like get going, right? And therefore, these four principles of virtue, which is wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage, allows you to have a framework of how you should respond in any situation, right? I think it is in the last episode that we mentioned AJ Musty,
Love it.
who basically said, I don't do this so that I can change the country. I do this so that the country doesn't change me. Right. So, in such a situation, Stoicism is not saying that your responsibility is to sit tight and follow the capitalistic creed. It is to listen to your own moral compass and have the courage to do what is in your ability to stand up against the tyranny in favor of justice. Right? That I think that sort of like fundamentally transforms, right? To say something that is inherently sort of depressing, to say you don't have control over everything, anything, to something that is liberating, to say it doesn't fucking matter, right? This is how I love.
Yeah.
So
very good. I pitched Breaking Bad, the TV show, the greatest TV show ever made, to a lot of my friends, and I'll tell them, why have you not yet watched Breaking Bad? Right? What are you doing with your life? And they tell me, I'll get to it. It's a long show. I'm watching something else. I'm watching Curb Your Enthusiasm. Oh, something. I'm watching whatever. Right? Game of Thrones. I'm like, what if you die tomorrow? Do you want to have died without having watched the greatest TV show ever made? I've actually said this and meant it when I've said it. Like, how can you not watch this show when you're still alive? So yeah, fully agree with Mahatma Gandhi, and
I believe you
with whatever you said.
But just to clarify to our listeners, watch Breaking Bad, but only after you finish this episode of Leftover Lasagne, and give us a 5-star rating, recommend it to a friend, etc. After that, you go watch Breaking Bad, please.
After that.
So out of these principles,
only
right?
If you've already watched Premalu 5 times.
Correct.
Yeah.
So just to elaborate on these principles, right? So wisdom is subdivided into things which are obviously good sense, good calculation, thinking in bets, quick-wittedness, which is what allows us to keep Leftover Lasagne going, discretion, which is not saying everything on this podcast, and resourcefulness, right? Which allows us to edit this fucking podcast. And justice is about how you deal with others, right? Which is honesty, equity, fair dealing, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And courage is about endurance, confidence, cheerfulness, interestingly, and industriousness, right? Which means that whatever situation you are faced with, like Viktor Frankl was in the concentration camp, how should he have reacted?
Yeah.
Right? And probably the last one is the one that I cannot accept, which is temperance / moderation, right? Which is to say everything, but in a specific measure, right?
It's very beautiful, right? This entire discussion, for some reason, keeps reminding me of one of those movies that all of us would have watched when we were young, and which was, very critically acclaimed and all that, which is the movie Castaway, where Tom Hanks plays this person who gets marooned in an island. And what I remembered about Castaway, of course, is he doesn't have any companions on this island where he's marooned.
Volleyball.
But there is this one football that he has.
Volleyball.
Right? Which, volleyball, yeah. It's some ball. So this
Wilson.
ball, where he paints, he paints the ball with his own blood. So he gives it eyes and a mouth and all of that. Becomes his companion for the entire period of time that he's stuck on that island, right? And you can imagine a person marooned all alone on an island, completely losing his senses, right? If he's not saved. And in the movie, I don't know how close to reality it is, but in the movie, what really keeps him alive is that companion, right? Who he talks to. And he even loses Wilson. I think Wilson gets pulled away by the water when the tide comes in, a few 1 or 2 years into his time there. And he grieves the loss of Wilson in a very, very big way. But religion is really that crutch, right? As much as it might be the work that you do, or capitalism, or whatever it is that gives you purpose, right? Your family, your children, your or the moral code by which you live, or the people that you serve, whose lives you try to make better, whether you're leading your life with stoicism or not, and so on. These are all various crutches, right, to help us traverse this journey that we have absolutely no control over, right? And I was just reminded of that as
Yeah.
you were telling me about the various facets
No.
and aspects of stoicism.
So two parts, right? Interestingly, as much of an atheist as I am, I feel like Jesus Christ is an amazing figure, right? Because he is the exact opposite of the capitalist moral code, where he basically hangs out with all kinds of wastrels, drinks all kinds of wine, and says, just love one another. And basically, I think both of our moral codes, which is just don't be an asshole to another person, right? Like that's about it. You can claim to have wisdom that is beyond X, Y, or Z, but you don't necessarily need to be an asshole. But the interesting thing when you mentioned Wilson was that the logical segue was to say that we started this episode calling you Hobbes, who was really an imaginary toy of Calvin's, but he keeps him going.
Hobbes, yeah.
Right. And in some senses, that is what this podcast
Yeah.
is, man. Why hunt you down to record in the middle of holidays is so that we keep this going, right? So
Yes.
not necessarily just stoicism, but also in life, I think one of the principles that you and I both look at is how can you probably be a little bit better today than you were yesterday, right? Hopefully, and maybe a little bit better tomorrow. And that necessitates Hobbes and Wilsons of some nature to keep you going.
Absolutely. Have you heard of pastafarianism?
Yes.
The flying spaghetti
Flying
monster.
spaghetti monster.
Yeah, so this is like that whole meme religion. It's meant like satire, saying that all religion and all the concept of God is all made up. So what if I come up with a new religion and I call it the pastafarianism, and it has the flying spaghetti monster, which is the deity of the church of pastafarianism, right? Now, leftover lasagna is also pasta at the end of the day. So I don't know if we might have just launched our own religion,
Oh
and
my
we are the
God.
two patron saints of this lovely religion. Yes.
Wow, it is all connected. Not only have you connected the episode
is connected.
start to end, you have connected episode 0 of Leftover Lasagne to episode 17. I think this is the full circle at which we should logically end this podcast.
It's beautiful. Like a stream of very cogent urine that does not splash back, we have connected the thread beautifully. By aiming for the bee in the bonnet, you might not hear a blader podcast than this podcast about bladders.
Yeah. No, so interestingly, what is Wilson at the end of the day but an inflated bladder? Right. That is literally what the volleyball is.
Oh boy.
There you go. So when you aim to rate this podcast, make sure you're aiming at 5 stars and nowhere else. And please tell a friend. Be the guy or the girl who goes to the urinal stall that is next to the guy, although there are empty stalls, and just go up to them and say, have you listened to Leftover Lasagne? Be that. This is our moral code.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for listening to the latest episode of Leftover Lasagna. Until we see you again in a week or so, please stay subscribed.
Yeah. We will be recording when Nitin finally gets to the Black Forest in Germany. So that will probably be a sweeter episode than usual. Right? From pasta to pastry.
From pasta to pastry, pay it forward and let your friends know about Leftover Lasagna.
Thank you. This is Tony and Nitin saying bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Leftover lasagne.
Leftover lasagna.
Lasagna, no way.
It's a type of sandwich.
Some kind of gross pasta.
Leftover Lasagna is a
podcast
hosted
by
by
my
Nitin
church
and Tony uncle. Leftover Lasagna.
Very funny name.